Confirm with the recording, please.
Yes, Vinny, we are recording.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome to this year's session for the overview of the animal ethics process at the university. Thank you for joining us. So just as an introduction, I'm Prof Naidoo, Dean of the Faculty of Veterinary Science, and the veterinary faculty has been tasked with administering the Animal Ethics Committee. It is not a faculty committee and represents all animal research undertaken at the university. And we are second-tier committee in that faculty committees submit the animal portions of all applications to us for consideration. So with us today, Marlies is joining us. Marlies is the secretariat for the committee. She's the full-time secretariat. And we have a few of the ethics committee members joining us as well. So, but welcome everybody. I'm going to go through a short discussion, probably about 30 to 40 minutes. And afterwards, we reserve the time for questions and answers. The questions will be on aspects of how the committee works, but could be your project-specific questions. So feel free to ask questions. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording, so this will be made available to everyone afterwards. Can I also ask that everybody please mute themselves because we are recording, and if you do come through, you are gonna.
Somebody else.
Somebody is talking in the background. Can I ask you to please mute yourself?
No, Domkabilo, Ukunumundava, if you only have Funega, it might push them to Thursday.
I've just unmuted everybody again. Vinny, can you hear me?
Okay. Right. Am I back?
I think yes, please.
Okay, sorry. All right, so we're going to start off with a bit of a debate around why animal ethics is important. So on the first slide, we have to look at the world around animal ethics. And generally speaking, there are two general thoughts. You either a protester in that you're opposed to testing, or that you agree that the test is important. And both groups have valid reasons for what they believe. So let's look at some of the reasons. So the biggest reason why there's protest to animals being used in research is animals are sentient. And as a result, they are aware of the environment. They do feel pain. And the question asks, is it fair to inflict pain on them? And who has given researchers the right to do this? The same question has been asked on the benefits. Now, a lot of rats and mice are used for medical research, biomedical research being the predominant users of animals globally. And the question asked is, has that really benefited science? There's a lot of argument to say that perhaps that interspecies variation is so large that you can't actually extrapolate. Then there are questions on, is it wasteful of life? Is it acceptable or is it morally wrong? Are we not playing God? And these are all reasons why people feel very strongly why animal research shouldn't happen. On the other side of it, we have to look at what is the benefits. Now, there's no doubt that the argument is human life is extremely important. And through the interventions of biomedical research, the lifespan or the average life expectancy of everybody around the world has doubled. If you look at statistics in the 1600s, in the UK as an example, you were very lucky to reach the age of 30. You are usually a parent by 16 and a grandparent by 25, or sorry, 30 at least. So as a result, the question asked is that where we want to go, or do we accept that there has been benefits? We now can treat infectious diseases, be it in people or in animals. The lives of animals have been bettered because we have better treatments, there's better management, there's better control. We have increased food production that supports both people and animals. And you can't deny the conservation value of all the zoological research that has been done over the years. How many species have been protected that otherwise would have been ignored if we haven't gone in and done the research? Now, the other important aspect is a lot of people will argue, but I don't see the benefit of the research. It has no impact on me. So I just see a question that the presentation is not advancing. Give me 2 seconds. Malis, can I just confirm what you're seeing on your side?
The heading is how does research impact on me?
Okay, so it is advancing for some. So it looks like it's a bit slow for some of the screen. So do bear with us. I do apologize for that. So the question is, what is the benefit? Now, it may not be that obvious, but realistically, a lot of what we've done and what we are and who we are as a country has come from animal research. Now, to put it into perspective, research is not just scientific research, but it's training as well. And you can imagine what the country will be like if we haven't trained our veterinarians, our basic medical scientists, agriculture, zoology. So that has a direct impact. But we also need to acknowledge that the benefits from animal testing have direct impact on our lives. And that is from basic medical devices, medicines. If you have taken a medicine, whatever it is, there's a likely an animal test behind that. Be it new surgical procedures, testing to show that our environmental chemicals are not going to be destructive to our natural wildlife, pesticides, food additives, cosmetics, nanoparticles, radiation, radio frequencies, and generally all our zoological research has been based on some sort of animal testing. So the question we need to ask ourselves is animal testing that bad? Has there been benefits? And what is the next step? And I think this is where we're getting with an animal ethics process is not that animal ethics is bad or the use of animals is bad, but how do you responsibly use animals so that you end up with information that is usable and not wasteful? Now, on the other side of the debate, people ask, note again. So let me try and reshare this and let's see how we go. All right, can I just check that everybody can see it again?
I can see it, Vinny.
Okay. So the question coming about is, if we're testing medicines as an example for using people, why not just test straight in people? And the argument is, if the animal models show some degree of interspecies variation, go to the species you want to test in. And this is where a large difference in opinion comes in. What is the difference between toxicity and safety? Toxicity is where you show the over potential of a molecule to cause harm, while safety is the relative safety of the molecule in a sense. So all medicines will be tested in people eventually. But what we want to know is, before we get on to testing in people, we cause minimal harm possible. The second question is, we have a lot of prisoners, we have our prisons full. Shouldn't they contribute to society and participate in these studies? And one of the arguments put in is, well, murderers can be put to good use. So what if the product is toxic? And this is where the ethical debates start coming in. Is it really acceptable to test a product on a person when you don't know the outcome? And considering that our legal system is based on reasonable doubt, can we conclusively say that person is guilty and deserving of that fate? At what point do you draw the line? Now, to put this into perspective, a few years ago, there was a frightening case in China where they were doing corneal harvest and they realized that you didn't have to do organ typing or tissue typing. And as a result, certain persons were sentenced to death for no other reason than there was potential to sell on that tissue. And this is where we sit in with the ethical debate. Is that allowable? There was a case in South Africa where a group of specialist surgeons in Durban were illegally involved in transplants, where persons, specifically kidney transplants, were recruited, they were paid, and an organ was harvested for sale. And the question is that ethical? And that's where you have this debate coming in. The other debate that usually comes up is we have a number of universities, we have students. Should we not recruit students into these projects? We can pay them. Their education is covered. It's equivalent to a bursary. And we get the information we want. It's the same question. Is that population really representative of what we're trying to achieve? Is it fair to have a captive population who's doing it for the money as opposed to the actual development of science? Can you have a case where somebody participates in multiple studies, interferes with the study results, put themselves at risk because of the additional income? Now, it may seem as an implausible scenario, but phase 1 clinical studies in many countries attract up to $10,000 per month to participate in the study. So once again, there's an incentive to participate in the study. And the question is that acceptable? And this is where the ethics debate comes in. So specifically for animal research, we have a set of principles in place, which are known as the 4 R's. Although technically it's still based on the 3 R's, with the 4th one being responsibility. So the 3 R's are simply replace, reduce, and refine. It says before any animal is used in an experiment, the questions that need to be asked are, is it really necessary to use that animal in research? Are there no non-animal models available? Is there no potential for a surrogate? Do you have to use a higher order species, or can a less sentient species be used? As an example, can I use an insect when another researcher has suggested mammals? Is it possible to go that route? The next question is, how many animals do I use? Reduction says use the least number of animals possible to prove your scientific objective. It is not, I think I need so many animals. You need to justify it properly. Also very important is the quality of the animals. Good quality animals give you good quality results. You don't want to unnecessarily repeat your study because that results in wastage of animals. Now, one of the typical arguments you get in biomedical research is it's a rat. It lives in garbage. Why should I provide absolutely clean environments for that animal to be during the study? It's expensive. And the question should be reversed and asked, can I trust results from an animal that is in an unclean environment, potentially exposed to a disease? How accurate is that result going to be? Could it interfere with my study result and give me a false positive or false negative? The next one is refinement, where you want to cause the least amount of suffering possible. So the first to this is to try and allow the animal to experience normal behavior. The animal should be in comfortable quarters, and you should provide for behavior. And this is where your enrichment tools come in, or your toys, as some people call them, to allow the animal to interact with the environment better. And through this, we at least get into a more ethical manner of using animals in research. The 4th R, being responsibility, is the onus is on the researcher and manager of that facility to ensure that there's compliance with these principles. So as a general rule, universities and other research organizations have to set up animal use and care committees. The committee is there to review and approve activities involving animals in research, teaching, training, and experimentation. And that's the general definition. So it covers every possible scenario where animals are used. The committee is there to evaluate the procedures to make sure that there's minimal discomfort, distress, and pain, that a veterinarian has been consulted with in planning the study to make sure that if medication is needed, that can be catered for, the living conditions specific to that species are met, all procedures are performed by qualified persons, that no animal will undergo more than one procedure unless it is properly justifiable why it is necessary for reuse, and to monitor the project for endpoints to make sure there's compliance. That is generally how your ethics committees are set up. they have this responsibility, which is then written into the organization's terms of reference. So in terms of the regulatory control, the question asked always is, what controls testing and what prevents testing? Now, very rarely are there acts in any country that prevent testing completely. There are nuances in what they allow and don't allow. So in the country, as an example, we have the Medicines and Related Substances Control Act, which registers all medicines and medical devices. You have to have a degree of animal testing for that registration. The same applies to your agricultural remedies, for your foodstuffs, for cosmetics and disinfectants. And then you also have your Hazardous Substances Act. Now, we've had a groundbreaking amendment to our Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act in that we're one of the few countries that says the testing of cosmetics on animals purely for its cosmetics benefit is banned. What that means is we as a country have accepted that cosmetic testing does not naturally benefit science. So it shouldn't be done. And the idea is reduce animals because the testing is not required. Then we have a number of acts that are put in place to protect the animal in a sense. And the Veterinary and Paraveterinary Professions Act controls the facilities, specifically biomedical facilities. The Animals Protection Act sets the minimum standards for care. You have your SPCA Act, which empowers the SPCA to do inspections. You have your Performance Animals Protection Act, which looks at the care of animals that are working. And then you have the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, most people will ask, but what does occupational health and safety have to do with animal care? By setting the minimum standards for the facility, which is acceptable for people working in that facility, you automatically set the minimum standards for the animal care. As an example, we know that allergens can be a problem with the housing and care of rodents. Therefore, if your facility has adequate precautions in place to prevent allergen transfer, your animals are automatically in better accommodations or quarters. Then you have your guidelines. Now, your guidelines are typically your standards. They are not enforced in law per se. However, they're drawn into other acts. And for South Africa, the guideline we use is the national standard, which is the care and use of animals for scientific purposes, which has just been edited and came out at the end of last year. This guideline is adopted by the NHREC, or National Health Research Ethics Council, and is the standard in which animal ethics committees are expected to perform in South Africa. Then you have a number of international guidelines, which you may have heard of, which ALAC is the most important one because they do international accreditations. And then you have things such as PHLASA and project-specific guidelines such as the OECD or VICH guidelines, which are designed more for pesticides and medicines. The OECD guidelines is probably the most commonly used guideline for toxicity testing. And what's very important is these guidelines have been highly optimized to minimize the number of animals needed in a test. And if you follow these guidelines and follow the accreditation processes, those results are internationally acceptable. So overall, it reduces the total number of animals needed worldwide for toxicity testing. So the Animal Ethics Committee of the University of Pretoria is a subcommittee, and it reports to Senate directly, or through a Senate subcommittee at least. And we have 4 categories of members, which are part of the SANS document guidelines. Category A are veterinarians with research experience, which our committee, the vet, chairs the committee. It doesn't have to be the case. And we have 3 members from the veterinary faculty serving in this role. Category B are researchers with animal research experience, not necessarily veterinarians, and preferably non-veterinarians. And here we have 3 members from NAS and 2 members from health sciences. We have representation from the NSPCA, who represent a welfare organization. And then we have a person outside of science. Now, typically it's recommended it could be somewhere like a theologian, a philosopher, or even a layperson. We typically will rely on the services of a theologian. And we have a member from the Faculty of Theology assisting at the moment. The Animal Ethics Committee is registered as a body with the NHREC, and we are strictly monitored, and our license is based on a 3-yearly renewal. That is extremely important because all the international grants that the university gets that uses animals or animal tissue usually ask for the registration conditions for the Animal Ethics Committee. So if the university was ever to lose its registration with the NHREC, it will be a struggle to maintain our international grants. So the mandate of the Animal Ethics Committee is written into our terms of reference, which is approved by Senate. And essentially, all in vivo studies are controlled, be it an animal observational study, such as your studies done in the natural environment, or clinical or preclinical studies in animals, which are typically your veterinary work or your biomedical research. Anything using animals to study as a study model, the use of all animals in training, and any animals that are used for breeding purposes and for research purposes are linked to that. Linked to this, the committee controls all animal-derived samples, be it samples immediately collected, samples that are biobanked, any ethically sourced tissues, and even abattoir-derived tissues. Now, the reason for this is journals are more and more expecting that all studies are approved by an ethics committee. And the question they would ask is, you declare that it's from an abattoir. They don't know if that abattoir is functioning correctly. Are they following a standard? So they leave the onus onto the ethics committee to make sure that the ethical standards are followed in all the processes in obtaining that tissue. So what is the value of this ethics approval? So it introduces a debate on your project at a committee level. So as a university, we make sure that animal life is respected, that studies not just done because they have to be done. There have to be some or other value derived from the use of those animals, that the results obtained will be of good value and are publishable, minimize unnecessary research, so you don't unnecessarily repeat studies just because you want to prove a point, to promote alternates, within reason, because some of the models are extremely expensive and you need to phase them in. And lastly, and very important, the committee plays a role in protecting the organization. Now, the last one is extremely important because the University of Pretoria's name is what will be tarnished if something goes wrong. And the idea is if the ethics committee has approved it, at least the university knows as an organization that somebody has looked at it and looked at all different angles in which this project could be considered, be it negative or positive. So just to run through the responsibility part of the 4 Rs. Now, there are numerous persons responsible for research, and there are certain expectations that are placed on them. So the first one is the researcher. As a researcher submitting your protocol, we know that we are responsible for the study design, the funding, and data analysis. But because of that, we are ultimately responsible for the housing and care standard that will be in operation. And we need to make sure that our studies are compliant with these minimum requirements. Obviously, some of our researchers are also involved in the study facilitation. And if it is a zoological study, obviously our zoologists are potentially in the field or involved in animal rooms. If it is biomedical, special registration is required with the South African Veterinary Council. And we do have a number of researchers who are authorized by the council to undertake certain procedures in animals. And there is a bit of debate on where simple sample collection has come in, but the Veterinary Council and SACNAS are in discussions on how to make sure that the right person is collecting the sample. The veterinarian's role on the study. Now, you'll notice that every time an application is submitted, we ask who is the responsible vet on the project. The reason for this is SANS place a lot of onus on the veterinarian. The vet is meant to be the ethical watchdog. They're meant to maintain animal welfare standards. They need to make sure that animals are not abused by researchers. Now, as written, it sounds really bad, but what it is to make sure that when a decision is of potential conflict, that the vet is there to assist the researcher in making that decision. To put it into perspective, it takes a significant amount of funding to do a study. We know that we have students who are registered who need to complete in a certain time. They have study costs. Now, unfortunately, if a study is not going as planned, it's not always easy to make the decision. Let's terminate the study now because the animals are potentially suffering, and accept that the student or the researcher or the funding request may be put at risk because of this. So it allows for that discussion and gives the researcher that onus to discuss it further with the veterinarian. And all in all, the vet is also responsible for checking that procedures that are not approved are not facilitated. Now, obviously, the vet can be involved in other aspects of that project, and there's been a bit of debate. Should the responsible vet also be the vet involved in the procedures? That will probably remain a debate because nobody quite knows where do you draw the line. Should it be two separate persons, or can the same person be responsible for both? Then for biomedical research, we have specific lab animal technicians or technologists who are registered as a para-veterinarian with the South African Veterinary Council. And they are trained in the care and management of laboratory animals specifically, and they are there to maintain the standards. So they're there to care for the animal, to facilitate procedures, to assist during surgical procedures, as an example, be involved in the anesthesia. And they are allowed to work with veterinarians or medical doctors because they are registered to have oversight over the animals. So in biomedical research, you'll find out that one of the requirements is that the animals are monitored at least twice daily, and one of those checks has to be done by a laboratory animal technician or by the veterinarian, just because it's a requirement for biomedical research. So just as a cap, so the mandate of the Animal Ethics Committee of UP is to look at all studies, be it observational or a design study. And we also then look at all training. Now, the committee has been tasked to get applications through as quickly as possible because of the impact on throughput times of students. So the committee essentially has 2 weeks to get through all the applications that reach Marlies's desk in time. So it's almost impossible to meet a 2-week deadline if we have to have every application reviewed, a meeting in place, and to pass on those comments to researchers and then make a decision. From past experience, that takes 2 months. So we have a split review process, and I know it creates a lot of angst with our researchers in that it seems as if a lot of the questions are unfair. So the first review is done by individual members as reviewers, and they ask questions of our researchers or students for clarification. The idea is to make sure that they understand the protocol correctly. It is those comments that go back to you as a researcher, which you then have a few days to respond, and the responses and questions then serve at the meeting, which are properly discussed and debated. So please bear with us, but this was the only way in which we could get your reviews through in as short a time as possible. And if you're looking at the workload of the committee, in an average month, we have at least 50 projects on the list. And to get through those in 2 weeks, you can understand is a heavy workload toll, since all our members are full-time academics and all of them are working part-time for the committee. So when you look at your application specifically, you'll find out that there are various portions of the application, and the application is designed to try and get the applicable information out of your project. So you'll find out that if you say, please refer to our protocol, the committee will not go back to your protocol. It's just time consuming to go that. So please fill out the necessary sections as completely as you can. And if an attachment is required, such as a diagram, just include the attachment. So the committee works with these questions, and the questions are specifically based around the 3 R's. So summary or overview of the project. The reason why we ask for 500 words is to understand what you're trying to achieve with your project, and what is the background information. When you're dealing with 500 applications in a year, it's impossible to have a background on all the projects, and we're too big a university for the committee to understand every project. So this is very important to help the committee to understand why you're doing a specific project. So be concise, but provide the necessary information. And the information we need is what has been done and why is your project important. So if you can convey that in 500 words, it's very important. The next important part is your sample size. The committee has been audited by the NHREC, and we've been told that we are to be extremely careful with sample size, so we're very strict with this section. So the minimum number of animals to be used or samples to be used will be approved. So as an example, if you say, I'm going to collect 50 samples, but my statistical analysis says 30 samples are necessary, the committee will say, use 30. If you need to get secondary approval, apply for an amendment. It needs to be justifiable, so provide the maths behind how you came up with your calculation. Whether it's an output from a sample size calculation program like GPower or SPSS, please provide that. If you are providing a biostatistician's letter, it is not acceptable for the biostatistician to just say, I recommend 10 animals. We want to know their thinking. The committee needs to know that the least number of animals that are required have been approved. And you'll find out that if you request, say, 10 to 20 samples, the committee will always approve the minimum number. We will never give you a range. We never allow open-ended projects. And the idea is in your annual review, you can provide reasons why you need more, or you can apply for an amendment. So that is a discussion you can have with Malise, and she'll advise you how to put in this amendment if you need to change your sample size. In terms of your study design, what we're interested in knowing is it necessary to use animals or animal-derived tissues? In other words, has the process or principle of replacement been properly put in place? Housing and care refers to the refinement of your project. Are the animals receiving adequate housing? Is there potential overcrowding? Is the ventilation adequate? If an animal gets sick, what happens? How will you manage this animal? How will you withdraw an animal that is injured? Now, a lot of projects, as an example, say we will be sampling in the field and don't actually consider what happens if an animal is injured during your sampling process. As rare as it is, that animal will require attention. Who's responsible for that? Who's going to pay for treatment? If an owner has to allow you to work on their property, are they now also expected to care for an injured animal? Are they expected to bear the loss? So those are aspects that are extremely important. The endpoints will be those areas in which you've decided that your study needs to be stopped because it's of no benefit. Typically speaking, it'll be an animal losing too much weight or an animal on a nutritional study that is not gaining weight. So these are something you'll decide. They're very project specific. There are specific guidelines recommended in the new SANS document, but you need to define those. And then lastly, what are the permits and informed consent requirements? Bear in mind with POPIA, there's limitations on what you can publish. So you need to be very careful that you don't publish confidential information and put somebody at risk because of that. Now, just as a quick overview of the system. So the system is automatic generated, as you probably all know, and you'll see the specific sections that are required. And as mentioned, you have your project overview, your aims and objectives. Then it comes down to the study methods, your proposed dates and start. So the committee is not allowed to do retrospective approvals. If your study has started, expect an immediate non-approval on that project. It is part of the ethics process. We do post-approvals. So the project either has to have previously collected samples on another protocol, which you're using again, which is fine, or you have to have it done in the future. You can't say, I've done my study, please give me approval. We will not also accept cases where studies are done at other universities through other ethics committees, and as a university committee, we've been asked to ratify their decisions. It has to all be done beforehand. Then in the terms of the new template, because there was a lot of questions on when should you submit the entire animal housing or when you should do only samples, the top part of this, which is 26 in this one, says declare whether you'll be using animals in your sample, in your study, or only historic samples. And how you tick these boxes will determine how your study will unfold. So if you are using animals, don't submit that you'll be using historically stored samples because the right sections will not open automatically. And then the rest of the application is your details on your study. What are you going to do? What are you going to collect? And then all the questions around the ethics I've gone through previously. So your questionnaire has been structured in how the committee evaluates your project. And lastly is declarations. It's very important to complete the declaration sections. The Animal Diseases Act is extremely strict. Anybody using tissues that are derived from animals that require transport, that are potentially from an infected area, that potentially could involve the spread of infectious diseases will require approval from the Animal Diseases Act. And you can liaise with Mullies if you need more information on that. Lastly, Mullies asked me just to show you what a typical approval letter will look like. Your letter will have your species and the number approved, and when there's samples, how many samples. Please check these letters. We've had cases where the application has been filled out and the researchers had an error in sample size. The committee approved what was requested, and the researcher then has done a larger study. If you do not correct it before your study starts, that is a problem. And according to the university, it is a disciplinary matter. So please check your letters when you receive them to make sure that the right sample size has been approved. You'll also find the conditions in which the project has been approved. Very important to note is that all incidents have to be reported, and this is a requirement of the NHREC as well. And the committee has to report annually on minor and major incidences. If there are any special conditions attached to your project, it'll be presented in red on the letter. And these are the conditions the committee has approved your project under. So please bear in mind that while you may have requested for A, B, and C, the committee may not necessarily have approved all three. And if there's anything that is not approved or there are conditions attached, it'll be present in this section. Once again, it is incumbent on the researcher to make sure that the project has been correctly approved. With that, colleagues, I am going to stop there and we can then move on to our question and answer session. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise a hand. Your questions can be put to me or to Marlies. So Marlies, if you can do moderator on the names. And
yes, I'm going to give Prof Christine Marit-Olivier a chance.
Thank you, Prof Vinny, for this refresher and why it's so important to do animal ethics. I've got three questions that we get at the NAS faculty quite often. So the one is on the documentation on the AEC website. It's the UP regulation S4532. I don't know whether that's outdated or whether it still stands, but there it clearly states that the principal investigator, who must be a full-time employee, must be the applicant who submit the application for animal research. So there's been a request now by a number of staff that they don't have enough time. Can the student submit this? And there's a lot of confusion on that. So that is my first question.
okay, so I think let's deal with the questions individually because we may lose them. So the document, unfortunately, is the current document. It is old. We've just got permission from Senate Committee for Research Integrity to update it. So we will be taking that into consideration. But the other consideration came with health sciences. And Marlies, if you can fill in on the latest development around that. On who can do the submission?
Okay, so it seems that the REC home faculty has has policies that students and staff must follow. So every REC faculty have different ways that they would ask like a supervisor how the students must be involved, or the staff. Must it be like every student must be the PI on the project, or there's different policies in place at the moment?
So I think the question then is, can a student fill out the application but the supervisor submit?
Unfortunately, the programming is done that only the PI on the application can submit, and nobody else can submit. So the supervisor still have access to the application and can edit, but cannot submit an application.
So Christine, so the student can capture the information if they're not the PI, but the PI has to do the final submission.
Perfect. That's the way I've got it as well.
Yeah.
So we will put that in our regulations. The other two pertain to umbrella coverage for projects. So on that same documentation, it's stating, that everybody should have their own. But for example, if you do one project, but there's numerous students on it, is it sufficient to just list them on the same application?
So after a lot of discussion, it was felt that umbrella approval is fine. So the ethics committee will approve a project. So the problem we have is that the university rules say that every student has to have their own certificate. So because of that, it becomes very difficult for the committee to submit or to approve on one certificate if the student's name is not on there. So what we have recommended is that the home committee, being the faculty committee, have a debate on this. And if they're happy for the student to have a generic ethics approval in their thesis or dissertation, as a committee, we're fine with that. We are not looking at the person, we're looking at the project.
Perfect. And then my last question, we're seeing it more and more that people have already collected samples in the past. They were just brought to campus, they were stored in the -80, and then applications are coming through that they want to go back and start testing things in these samples. And this is opening some serious issues with biobanking, and that we're seeing more and more audits, from the Department of Agriculture on this. So is there any way forward that we can put down something in writing, the regulations, the requirements to actually set up a correct biobank or, valid biobank?
Yeah, so you raise a very important question. So Christine, I have taken this through in Lexo for a legal input. So when the Department of Agriculture did that amendment on their rules, it said all tissue banks have to be registered with them. And unfortunately, a lot of us missed that, including the vet faculty, and it's binding. And so all university labs that are storing tissue samples have to formally register with agriculture as a biobank. The veterinary faculty was the first to go through this because we were the ones wanting in the audit. So the recommendation from Inlexo has been that you approach the department and declare that you have samples in storage, and they'll want a list of the samples, the potential infectious status of those samples, and we go through the process of getting them registered. The SOPs were developed for the veterinary faculty. As a faculty, they are freely available to anybody who wants to use them to get their biobanks in order. I would strongly recommend we do this because since Inlexo's opinion is that we will be found wanting if we get audited, those samples can be destroyed, and we don't want to lose that biological material.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Vinny.
Thank you. The next person is Romina Enriquez.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for a very good presentation. I just wanted some clarification. You say that if the project was approved by another university's ethical committee, it doesn't count for us. But what if we're getting tissue samples from a different project and we're responsible for a portion?
Yes, so thank you for that. So because the tissues have been collected from a different study and essentially our biobank. So what the ethics committee would look at is your protocol to use this tissue. So you would apply for ethics permission to use those tissues. And one of the questions that the committee would ask is just some background to show that the samples were collected ethically.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Prof.
The next person is David Scott.
Yes, good morning. Nice presentation, Vinny. A general question is once a veterinarian graduates and goes into private practice, how does the animal care requirements affect private veterinarians in private practice? Ostensibly, they have to sample animals for diagnostic purposes. They may have to euthanize animals. There's a wide variety. How does that affect private practitioners?
So the Veterinary Council has come in on this one. So as a vet, as an example, as a registered vet myself, I'm not allowed to practice privately until I have a formal registered practice, and that practice has to meet certain minimum requirements and standards. So what they've done is to say that any vet involved in research has to be at a registered facility to make sure that you meet the minimum requirements set out in the Veterinary Act. And if you are using a vet as a part-time basis, as an example, in collecting samples in the field, that vet has to be attached to a registered facility. So they're not allowed to practice just on their qualification. They have to meet certain minimum standards in practice.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Sipho Gift Nkosi.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Prof, for that presentation. I just want to find out in terms of how far and wide does the ethics policies and procedures extend relatively to ecological control?
With regards to the progress on that as well.
So if you're looking at if a study involves an animal in any sense, so any biological sample from that animal, even if it's a fecal sample, or if it is observation of the animal, it requires ethics approval. So the debate has come about on your insects and arachnids. Strictly speaking, the Animal Ethics Committee doesn't have oversight over that. That is a faculty committee's responsibility, although the committee has always made itself available to try and assist the faculty in coming to that decision. So realistically, anything involving anything but insects and arachnids will require approval. And the reason behind this is we need to make sure that the project is done in an ethical manner holistically. So as an example, just say I'm observing a lion in a cage. Now, I may not be directly involved with that animal. I may not be sampling it directly. However, there's implications on the university in that that animal may be in confinement that is unethical. So the cage may be too small, or it may be bred for canned hunting purposes. Does the university's name get associated with that? Now, we had a case at another ethics committee where researchers were going out and being involved with elephant research. And that site was audited by the SPCA, and they found out that the animals were being beaten and the care was suboptimal. And the first thing they declared was, we were working with this organization, the ethics approval has approved the project. How can you tell me that I'm being unethical? So we want to try and safeguard from the university's name being used as an excuse to make an unethical procedure ethical.
Yeah, just to be precise, Prof, there's an incident that I basically some time ago came across is that there is some form of darting in terms of geese control within the university, and I'm not too sure whether the communication between two officers relatively to the ethics committee was then communicated further to say that this process will be undertaken.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Malise to come in there. Malise, do you know of anything?
To my knowledge, no.
Yeah. So realistically, it should have been approved. Another example is the cat control program that happens on some of the campuses. The registrar's office has indicated that while it's not in a strict sense ethical, they want the committee to have an oversight on it, because if somebody questions it, the committee can answer the question. So I don't know if that helps with your question.
I think I will communicate out of this meeting.
All right, okay, not a
Great.
problem. Okay.
Thank you. The next person is Dr. Akanmu.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the the question I have is, we have a lot of students that just do lab procedure using rumen, and then we have these cannulated stairs on the that we just go to collect rumen fluid and do procedure in the lab. So we just use these animals as donors. Now, do we have to apply each time for every student that want to do the same procedure for animal ethics? Can't we just do like an umbrella application that covers all the students that's going to use this procedure, since it's going to be done in our lab, and then we have technician to supervise the process? Can we do it for like a year, 2 years, which is renewable?
Yeah. So most definitely we can have a look at that. I think the best way is actually set up a meeting with us to see how we do it. So our process is yearly renewal. So approval is only for a year. And what the committee would want to know is, as an example, how many animals are involved? How often will they be sampled? What is the resting period? So if you can answer that question over an entire year and put in some safeguards. So as an example, you could say that in a given year, I expect to do 30 projects. Even if you don't necessarily reach that, it is how do you prevent an animal from being oversampled? So we need to know that you're not going to today collect 30 liters from one animal and put it at huge risk, and then tomorrow or for the next 3 months do nothing. So it's definitely possible, and I think we can get your project to that point. We must just look at it.
Okay, I will be in contact.
Thank you. The next person is Andrea Webster.
Prof, thanks very much for the presentation. I've got a question regarding the use of samples that are collected on the reserve that you're working on. So if they were collected, say, in the course of normal management duties, is it possible for those to then be utilized by a student for a project? I also have a few other questions. So
okay, yeah. So most definitely. So all the committee would look at in this case is how ethically sourced those tissues are. So as an example, let's take a culling process where the animals are shot. So the committee would want to know is that these animals were shot as part of a culling process for other control measures and not for the study. That the process used was ethical. So in other words, if it was, say, to be shot, that it was by a professional hunter and it was a clean shot. It wasn't somebody taking multiple shots and injuring the animal where you had suffering. So it is definitely possible. We have numerous projects where this happens. So we just look at whether the tissues eventually were ethically sourced.
And then what is it that the ethics committee needs in order to be assured that it was ethically obtained? Because if you as a researcher are told, oh, we've got these, I don't know, 900 herbivore samples from culled individuals, what does the researcher need to obtain in order to prove to the ethics committee that that's been ethically done?
Yeah. So it's a process involved and the management plan for that area. So what we want to know is essentially that it's not illegal. I mean, that's the most important thing. So as an example, if some other nature conservation permit was required that was in place already, that the process did not result in harm of the animal in the sense that it didn't suffer before death. And that's what we look at. So there is a bit of a discussion with the committee in that it's historic and we can't outrightly prove or disprove it happened, but we expect the farmer to be honest in their disclosures.
Okay, thanks. And in terms of, you said earlier with your lion example that perhaps the cage is too small, or the facility that you've chosen to do your research with is known to not practice ethically. Are there lists of these non-ethical institutions or places available for students so that they don't have to waste their time going through the whole process of applying for an ethics application only to discover that they're sitting in Pretoria, what do they know?
Yeah.
They've been sending emails. Is there a list that you have put together that's of unsuitable institutes that we shouldn't be using or working with?
Oh, yeah. So unfortunately not. We can have a discussion with the NSPCA to see what they have in. So we rely on the NSPCA's wildlife unit as an example to do a lot of these inspections. And if there's no inspection reports, we require the site to provide proof. So if it is a fairly simple study, they can provide pictures or videos of what they have. But if it's a more intense study, the NSPCA or SPCA inspectors will go out on our behalf. So as an example, we had a dog study once where on inspection, the NSPCA found exactly that the animals were not housed to the standard in which they should, and the site actually got a warning. So it probably is a working process, and Malis, maybe we can look at that with the NSPCA to see if such a list is available, and if it is in compliance with POPIA, we can try and make a list available.
Okay, thanks.
That would be great. Thanks, Prof. And then also in terms of non-invasive studies, I understand the necessity to go through these extreme checks and balances for a lot of, you know, sort of veterinary studies that are being conducted where you're actually handling and injecting animals or, you know, starting them or obtaining samples from live individuals. But in terms of non-invasive studies, such as fecal material or hair traps or that kind of thing, is it necessary to have to go through all of these processes to such a degree?
So you'll find out that we are a bit open, so you don't have to always fill out every section. If it's not applicable, it's not applicable. What we would ask is don't fill out not applicable just because it's you don't want to go through the process of filling out those blocks. But as an example, using traps, what we want to know is a description of the traps to show that it's not going to cause injury to the animal, that the traps are checked frequently enough so that there's no thermal stress on the animal. So those are aspects we look at with trapping. In terms of feces, realistically, we want to know is that the researcher is in that environment with permission, that they will not be interfering with the general well-being of the animal by collecting those samples. So we get a lot of those samples. They, as you said, they are not technically complex in how the animals are managed. And all we want to know is the background procedure to make sure that it's once again ethically sourced.
Okay, thanks so much, Prof.
Thank you. The next person is Gerard Steenkamp.
Good afternoon, Vinny. Thank you for the talk. My question relates to case studies and retrospective studies. I saw in one of your slides that you excluded retrospective studies. Can you maybe just give us a bit more clarity? Because this is often a problem where you've done 5 years later, you think back and say, oh, I've done 6 of those cases and now I want to write them up.
Yeah.
And then often the ethics committee comes back and says, but you need the approval of the client. You can't go back all that time.
Yeah. So it was a process and it's facility specific. So the facilities that have asked us for assistance, we've helped them. So what we've done is through the registrar's office looked at the informed consent forms and made sure that the forms say my sample or the animal's data can be used for future research. So we've done that for the academic hospital. We've done it for veterinary pathology, veterinary tropical diseases, and a few other labs. So once that is in place, you can go in and safely use that information for research purposes because it's just data mining. There's no animal tissue involved. The ethics committee or animal ethics committee doesn't have to look at it. The faculty committee can do that approval. It's only when tissue banks are used. So if you go back and say, I saw 5 interesting cases, but I need to go back to the stored sample to redo analysis, that's when you need ethics approval. As long as the owner has given approval upfront, you don't need to get further approval to use those samples. However, because of POPIA, when no approval is granted for reusing those samples, you have to individually contact the owners for permission. And if the owner in their informed consent said, I do not want to be contacted again, you can't contact them. So you have to respect POPIA, and there are huge fines for contravening POPIA at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person, Lecho Nolo Andrew.
Thank you, Marlis. Thanks, Prof, for a wonderful presentation. Just want to find out, let's say I'm still new at the University of Pretoria and I want to do some research. I don't have the connections at Onderstepoort. I don't have veterinarians that can assist me. Do we have a list that we can choose from? Because sometimes you send emails, you don't even get any response from them. I understand they're very busy, but can we have a list for emerging researchers, people who are still new? Because the current system, it favors the well-connected, experienced researchers.
Yeah, no, I hear your comment. We've never had that request before. Let me take it back to our research committee at the veterinary faculty and see what we can do. But I'm sure that shouldn't be too difficult to put together a list.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Jafta.
Thanks, Prof, for a beautiful presentation. What I want to ask is this: we have a project that we have started, and the student wanted to go back to go collect some samples because the sample size was a little bit low. But then the principal investigator applied for ethics that covers, the Gauteng and other provinces. The question is, then when we wanted to continue the project and cover the enough samples that is needed, we had to apply for the ethics committee approval and all that. So, but the problem is taking too long, and the students need to continue the project so that she can finish. The question is, can the student continue the work since the principal investigator has covered, that request has covered other provinces and all that? Will that be, and then when we're still waiting for other approvals to be done from ethics and other things like that, will that be possible?
Yeah. So you're talking about blanket approval. So if there is a blanket approval to use a larger area with larger samples in the same principal investigator, there shouldn't be a problem. However, if the original project, as an example, was testing for disease A, and you're now going in and testing for disease B, it's not allowed. So whatever you're doing has to be covered holistically in that other project. So it's not just the samples. So if that is not the case, the student has to wait for approval. You can't just go in and collect those samples while approval is pending. Now, we do accept that the process can take some time. As I said, if it gets to us, we try and do it within 14 days. However, for those emergency projects where you need to go in, say, the next day and do something, and there are those projects, obviously we don't expect them to be the norm. You can approach Marlies directly and she will see whether you can get ad hoc approval for those projects. It does happen. So obviously, we don't want it to happen too often because the committee members are not available to do the reviews, and it creates a problem from getting too many. But for those absolute emergencies, feel free to approach Marlies to see if you can get ad hoc approval.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The next person is Palesa. Palesa, you still, there we go. Palesa, do you want to ask a question? Okay, let's go to Martina. It seems Palesa have a problem with the, I'm just going to mute Palesa. Then we're going to Martina rather.
Yeah, maybe if you can't speak, you can type. Oh, yeah, I see you actually already. Yeah, so if you can type your question, we'll get back to it.
Okay, where are we now? Martina, are you available to speak to us?
Okay, I see that the question is in the text box, Marlies. So
I
the
can't
question
see it.
is, all right, I'll read it out. Is anatomy a biobank? In the sense that you're dealing with stored tissues, yes. Is it registered as a biobank? I cannot answer the question. I haven't actually seen any documentation. So since anatomy is using tissues that are stored, in terms of what agriculture has told us, it has to be registered. And the difficult question, Martina, I think your question is, what a lot of labs have is we have a lot of old samples that we don't necessarily know where they come from. How do you get approval for those? Do we just throw them away? So we've had discussions with the registrar's office, and the answer is these samples are way too valuable to just throw them away. So what we will try and do is have a discussion with agriculture to see how we can get those samples approved. So please have the discussion. You're welcome to drop me emails if you need assistance. But I do not recommend that anybody goes and destroys samples until we actually get a letter from agriculture saying destroy. And in that case, we'll have to discuss with the registrar's office on how to process or proceed with this. And just in terms of the new procedure, the registrar's office is responsible for UP collections, and that is your heritage items. And the committee has taken the decision that all biological samples are part of UP collections, and we should try our best to preserve them properly and make sure that they are properly curated and that we have the right approvals in process. So Martina, I don't know if that answers your question. So we should do it, and please don't destroy any samples.
Thank you. I think we can go to Romina again, Enrique.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. Prof, that's really good idea that all our tissues become part of the UP collection. To be a biobank, if I understand, we need quite stringent storage protocols and we need to have an online database. Will we get help to do that? That's my first question.
I actually don't know, but I mean, I'm sure if we have a collective request, then we, as a committee, I can drive it. So if anybody needs that assistance, maybe drop Molly's an email so that we can start trying to work towards this. So agriculture at this point did not necessarily say it had to be an electronic database in the sense that it's one of a formal database. It could be in Excel as an example. But what they wanted is a sample number. So each sample had to be identifiable. You have to know where it is. And if the history is available, have that documented. So at this point, I would suggest that we do it in Excel. And if there's need, I think we must then approach the university to see how we can invest in this these database storage systems.
Perfect, thank you. And my second question is, because well, it always takes time to approve anything, but this means that sometimes we start the project and we wait quite a long time to get approval to go to the field to do sampling. And if our sampling might be, I come from ecology, our sampling might be seasonal, so we might be a bit constrained. Does it mean that we should be submitting our applications before we get the funding? Or will that be a waste of time for everyone anyway? Because we might not get the funding, so we might not get the project.
Yeah. So we're very open. So submit whenever you're ready. We do have a number of projects that get cancelled every year because funding is not approved. Yes, it is an additional workload on the committee, but I would feel that because we're assisting researchers, we should go that way. In terms of the timelines, because it goes through a two-committee process, it does delay things. So it does mean that you have to apply quite a bit in advance. And while we are allowed to do ad hoc approvals, the faculty committees don't always agree that that is the right way forward. So we can have a discussion with them to see how we can try and streamline the process. But unfortunately, I think we're always going to be at least 2 months before approvals come through, if not longer, if the faculty committee has cutoff dates. And also bear in mind that some projects get approved by 3 to 4 committees.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next guest, Bongile Koza. Bongile Koza.
While we're waiting for that, there was Palisa put a question in the text box. Which procedures are permitted to be amended during an experiment with live animals without approval from ethics? That is an extremely difficult question to answer because the project is approved based on the specific conditions indicated. So maybe give me an example, if you can, of what you had in mind, and then we can discuss the specific example.
Bongile, are you still available?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, you're coming through perfectly.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was saying I missed your presentation earlier on due to some technical errors. However, if you have any recording, may you please kindly share?
Yes.
So now coming to my question, because approval took a bit of time, and then there were some delays in terms of sample collections and all that. So now I am currently going through some challenges, and then I would like to know if I want to apply for renewal, how do I go about it?
Okay, so the system is an automated system. So every year on the date of, Malis, correct me, date of submission or date of approval?
Date of approval.
Date of approval, the system will send you a reminder that you have to renew. According to the way the university set up the ethics process is all projects require annual renewal. And so you will have to go that, and it's quite easy to actually renew your project on the system. There are certain questions that the system is set up to ask, and you can indicate what you've used, what is required, and you'll get further approval for another year. If you do require an amendment, you can do that as well, and there's a process for that as well. And I think Marlies can discuss further. Marlies, if you just want to go through the two processes.
Yeah, so on the Ethics Work Center, there's pre-approval submissions, that's for new applications. And then once we grant approval, you will have access to the post-approval submissions. It's just a tab below the pre-approval submissions. And it asks you, do you want, you can search for your project, it will bring up all your project numbers, and on that, it will ask, do you want to submit a new post-approval submission? And then it will give you a few options: annual renewals, amendments, completed projects, incident reports. And then you click on the correct tab there, and then it will open a template with questions that you need to answer.
Okay, so meaning that I have to go to my I have to go to the UP student portal.
Yes, it's the very same way that you do your new application. Oh. It's all on that same site.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see, Jaco Greef.
So my question relates to population genetic research, and actually in zoology there's many other kinds of research where there's not simple power calculators. The stats is a bit more involved, and often it's not in there's no statisticians that can actually write you a letter to say that this is the correct sample size. So one has to go with what other people did overseas, or you have to simulate data and run the test and make sure that you can do that. But that will not give you a letter. Can you please advise about this, please?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that, because that's a very important point. So the committee is tasked with looking at minimal samples. So we understand that it's not always easy. So what we would accept is if there is a statistical manner of setting your sample size, that'll be option 1. Biostatistician letter is option 2. But for studies in which you are dealing with what has been commonly accepted in publications, and you can provide the abstract of that publication to show that this is what is accepted in normal scientific publications, that's acceptable as well. So we've had cases where the stats calculation came up with a few hundred animals, but the researchers said, but in current recommendations, a smaller portion is allowed and provides that reference. The committee has approved that without a problem. So all we need is a proper justification on why the sample size is acceptable. And if stats sample size prediction is not possible, just declare it. The committee is very open to having that discussion.
Thank you. I see we have one more comment, Vinny, just on the chat.
Okay. So it's from Dr. Hupner. I understand that the committee doesn't necessarily have the time to read through all the protocols. However, it creates a lot of frustrations of the questions from the protocol, from the committees answered in the protocol. Writing rebuttal letters wastes time involving co-workers, further delaying the process. Is it possible to review this process, possibly have all applicants available telephonically online? So the researchers need to have a bit of understanding. As I said, there's a minimum 50 applications per meeting. So if we have all 50 persons standing by to answer questions, that would take quite a bit of time. And also bear in mind is that the committee is reading these applications for the first time, and it's natural to miss a few things. And we're asking for clarification. So it may seem unfair to you, but also bear in mind that each reviewer has to read through 50 applications a month. So this is the best way in which we can try and get through all the applications in a timely manner. But if the process is frustrating people and people want us to go back to a committee decision for every question, will people be happy with, would researchers be happy with a 2-month delay for the committee to come up with a final answer? So this is the discussion is, are you willing to go through the frustration of dealing with questions, which we won't argue, some of it is in the application, but it may be missed because of the time periods, or would you like a longer review process to allow the committee to deal with this? I don't have the right answer. The committee is trying its best to try and get through the applications as quickly as possible.
Can I ask Dr. Hoffner to respond?
Yeah.
Afternoon, Prof. I think maybe just to clarify is that I completely understand it, and obviously I'm very new to research and I haven't been on the committee myself, but from personal experiences that some of the questions that got asked is, for example, I submitted an application for a descriptive study and then I got asked questions about stats and sample numbers, but I'm literally just describing stuff. And basically my study design already tells the committee that it's a descriptive study. So that's those type of questions are frustrating because it should be clear that, you know, stats are not necessary for a descriptive study. So it's those type of questions that I would like to avoid.
So I completely understand. Malise does try her best to go through the questions, but Malise, if you explain the timelines, how long do you have to drop all the questions and send it out?
About 4 hours.
Okay, I didn't even realize it was that short. Yeah. So it is unfortunately a time constrained manner. And as I said, yes, ideally, the committee should have enough time to go through every project in a lot of detail and screen these comments, and we will try and do that. But as I said, unfortunately, sometimes these do come into the process. And as I said, we are asking researchers to bear with us so that we can get through your protocols as quickly as possible.
Yes, Prof. Christine, do you still want to ask a question?
Yes, please. This is just an open question. I just want your opinion on this, Vinny. It's about getting things through as fast as possible. So at the Natural Agricultural faculty, typically every application, if you use a laboratory, it goes through the laboratory committee. If there's a biohazard, it has to go through biohazard. If there's an animal, it goes through animal. So what was happening in NAS is that sometimes animal applications had to go through 3 committees. So the only way that we could actually mitigate for this was to say that people that are looking at animal projects also look at the laboratory component and at the biohazard risk. So that is similar, you know, where we then have one research committee and then it goes to the AEC. So my question then is that acceptable with regards to the guidelines or the different regulatory bodies if we do that? Or would you suggest that we still go with that? I mean, the feedback I got was we have to decide.
Yeah. So I think your last comment is exactly how it is. The faculty is allowed to set their own process as long as all the ethical aspects are covered. Whether it's one reviewer or the entire committee doing that review, it's been left to the faculties to make that decision. So as in terms of the animal ethics, because we are signed on to a code of conduct, we have to review animal ethics in total. And in fact, we've been told that we shouldn't rely on decisions taken by the home committees because it's a biases the committee in how they're thinking. It should be a fresh approach based on just the 4 category members having a discussion. So simple answer, Christine, whatever is easier for the faculty committee won't influence how we do our evaluations. They are treated as 2 separate processes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I can just put my mind at ease now. Thanks.
Then it just these comments in the chat section. It's Palesa.
So let's see. So the first one was from Palisa. For example, sometimes we might do an experiment for the first time and you pick up during the experiment that imaging at different time points or tweak in a procedure is needed to improve or better the experiment. So that likely will need ethics approval because you're changing how you're fundamentally evaluating your project. So I think, Liz, maybe what we should do is if you can send us examples and we can discuss it as a committee and come back to you directly. Because based on just your comment, it sounds like it would need further approval from the committee, but I just want to make sure so we can discuss that as on a per project basis. The comment from Romina is, do we need a broader range of scientists on the panel? We have no objections if other members would like to join the committee. They do just have to accept that the workload is quite substantial. I think on average, every committee member spends 3 days of their working month on ethics applications in addition to the other responsibilities. So it's something we can certainly look at. The guidelines just set the minimum number of members that the committee has to have. And if there's voting on how to have that will be managed, but very rarely does a committee ever get to a vote because a lot of it is by consensus decision. So there was a Tina said that I'm not too sure what you mean by it'll speed things up because applications will need to be reviewed repeatedly. In what regard is that? Sorry.
Tina, do you want to answer?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
That was with regards to recommendation or option to maybe allow us to send our protocol.
I'm sorry, Tina, you broke up I can barely hear you. Melis, did you get that?
No.
Tina, if you can try again, sorry.
Sorry, does this work better?
That's perfect, yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So it's basically with regards to Nicoline's question regarding getting us into those sessions and allowing us to defend or explain our protocols immediately. That way we don't have to rebound them back and forth for several months if it's just minor things. Because that might just, avoid having to reassess them every month.
Yeah. So as it was purely a time decision. We can certainly have all the researchers on standby for these questions. It's something that we can discuss further with researchers. But I think realistically, and looking at how the committee has done approvals, very rarely do projects stand over. In most cases, it's actually a case of the questions that Melis has sent out haven't been responded to in time. And it could be because people are out in the field or they were busy with other activities and didn't get to the emails. And I think if we can try and manage that, and what we ask is that if you do submit an application, just be on the lookout for the questions. Usually it's typically on the Thursday or Friday before the committee meeting. And also for students who are submitting the application, very important to note is that the system automatically picks up your UP email address. And if you haven't set up an automatic forwarding for the UP email address to your actual email address, you're going to miss those emails. And in most cases, we found that the applications just sit for ages because nobody's received those messages. So if we can at least advise students submitting to please make sure that they check the email addresses, and that is the UP email address.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I just want to see if there's anybody else. Bongile Koza, you want to speak again? Bongile Koza, you still available?
While we're waiting, Christine has a message in the chat box. Foot and mouth disease, how was the day 21 days decided, and what guidelines are there in place for researchers to prevent the spread of foot and mouth? So as a committee, we haven't really looked at that. We've relied on the experts at the academic hospital to put together a SOP on how this can be done. So if anybody would like it, we can make it available. So it's not really part of the mandate of the committee to look at that, but we can certainly assist if needed.
Then Alisa, do you still want to ask a question? Alisa, can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, you're on. Yes.
Yes, I'm on. Thank you. Prof, where I'm coming from is because I think everyone is a bit stressed about the delays with the ethics amendments and all that. And sometimes, you know, these experiments that we do, they cost a lot of resources, and you kind of like restricted in terms because you just don't, you know, in other animals anytime that you feel like there's times where there's breeding that has to happen and all that, which takes time as well. So sometimes you are in a lab, there's an experiment going, things have been approved, we work you know, according to the protocol, and you find out maybe if maybe you want to change the injection site, you don't want to inject maybe in the right flank, you want to go left, you know, or maybe if you administer anesthesia for maybe a certain duration, it might, you know, better the experiment. I think that maybe if there's no such where there is, you know, a room where certain procedures can be done, you know, without receiving an approval, where maybe we can report what was changed, like a deviation, so that we don't lose our resources in doing, you know, things, if, yeah, doing things that could, that compromises our, you know, result as well, maybe if we had that room to improve as well.
So no, you don't have that room because the project is approved under certain conditions. So if you change anything, the entire process has to be looked at. So as an example, if you're putting the animals under anesthesia, we would want to know what anesthesia, who's doing it, what duration, what's recovery, what's the impact. So those are things that you'd want to know. And so in those cases, this is why we have an urgent process or ad hoc approval process. So approach Marlies and you can have a look at it. But as an example, say if you got approval to do intramuscular injection, very rarely do we specify exactly where you have to give that intramuscular injection. So that there's a leeway because there's no stipulation. However, if you say going from intramuscular to intraperitoneal or subcutaneous, that will require approval. So yes, there are ways to optimize a project, but a lot of that optimization could change the entire view of how the project was approved. So that needs to be looked at. And we need to look at it globally as an ethics committee, is that at what level is that leeway a new project? And so we can't allow for it, and that's not allowed in terms of the principle. So it is a trust issue, I know, but the committee has been tasked in terms of the national standard to be a watchdog to make sure that procedures are undertaken as approved in the protocol. Marlies, I think we have run out of time, so we will have to conclude here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hopefully you found it to be a helpful session. Please feel free to drop any questions you have to Marlies if there's any information you need further. As I said, we are here to also assist. So the committee is of the opinion that if we can get a project into a manner that meets the ethics code, we will help you get there. Our job is not to just to reject a project because it doesn't meet the code. So once again, thank you everybody for your time. I'm sure there are other questions, but we can touch on them at a different time. Marlies will make available the recording. I'm not 100% sure how as yet because of the size of the file, but we will get it out there. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.